Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Florida IP Day's Webinar Wednesday. What you have this afternoon is myself, Bonnie Goonen, and Susan Pittman, and we're going to take a look at the most missed items on the 2014 GED test, something that we've been talking about wanting, and now we have it. So let's go ahead and just get started. If you have any questions, etc., as we go through today's webinar, please put them in the question or chat box and we'll make sure that we answer them right away for you, or whenever we need to in the communication. As in past webinars, this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on the Florida IP Day website. So, having said that, on behalf of Susan and me, welcome again. Today what we're going to do is review data from the GED testing service that we just received late this summer. And we're going to talk about the most missed items on the 2014 GED test and how we can start to address those items as we go forward. We're also going to talk about a few resources in PD and talk about where we're going to head from there. As we go through, though, please note that it really is all about the student. And as we're looking at it being all about the test taker, it really is. We want to make sure that our test takers, our students, have the skills that they need. But GED Testing Service is also working hard to make sure that they have the support that they need as we go forward into 2014-15. What's happening with the GED test? Well, let's take just a quick look at a few statistics. Right now, there are 2,500 testing centers that offer the GED test nationwide. In fact, there's 1,000 more in the pipeline that are getting ready to be a testing site. And right now, we know that there's over 500,000 accounts on GED.com, MyGED, and 325,000 subject tests taken. Now, please don't think you need to write all of this down. Prior to this webcast, you should have had the files that you could download this PowerPoint and download the attachment that went with it. But this is what's happening nationally, and the national feedback has been very positive from our students. But how about Florida? How about our home state? What is happening here? As of earlier, or I should say later last month, here are the stats. Right now we have 188 different testing centers. And when you look at how many GED test modules have been delivered, we are over 55,000. Not bad. We do have, though, out of that 55,000, when we compare it to GED ready tests being taken, only 28,000 there. More about that in a moment. We have 14,000 test takers and 8,000 who have actually completed all four of the subtests, with about 4,600 graduates right now. But when we look at the passing percentages, are we doing better or are we doing worse than we were in the 2013 version? Well, really, when we look at the stats on the next slide, you'll see that they look very similar to what they've always looked like. Quite honestly, the passing percentage for reasoning through language arts is better than it is in math. Math has always been our problem child and continues to be. But when we're looking at passing percentage, RLA is at about 75%. Social studies 66%, and science 71%. It is, again, the math that's causing us a problem. However, how much of a problem is it causing us? GED Testing Service, as well as Florida's stats, showed that when we're looking at the average non-passing score, most of our students who aren't passing are missing each of those subtests only by about 1 to 3 questions. That's it. So that's really not bad. And if we use the GED Ready to assess, quote, readiness for the test, we should be able to get those scores up. And if we take a look at what we're going to look at in just a bit, most missed questions, again, we should be able to easily in our classrooms assist our students in getting those 1 to 3 questions correct. If you've been visiting GED testing service on a regular basis, you'll know that there's a great deal out there right now. From September 22nd to October 3rd, there will be free GED Ready test for your students. All you need to do is go out to GEDtestingservice.com and take a look at See for Free to register. What a great way to start the school year, having those students in our GED prep programs take a free GED Ready and see what skills are necessary for success and what skills they have to still work on with us. So if this is something new to you, please take a look at GEDtestingservice.com/see for free to see how you can register your site and get your students a free GED Ready test during that time frame. So, having said that, that's kind of an intro for where the nation is and where we are as a state. So, let's just take a very quick look at the big picture of the GED test.
Bonnie, there's one thing I want to just reiterate here for people with the free GED Ready. The one thing that we're seeing is that we just don't have as many students taking GED Ready before they go to take the operational test as we should. And as Bonnie said, it really is that great predictor of readiness. So having this opportunity to get students in there through your programs, that September 22nd through October 3rd, take advantage of that, because we're seeing that, you know, it really is a valid predictor, and it could make a big difference in being able to recruit students into the classroom. So that will make a difference for us. Here's one other item that I'd like to add, and just in case, because I haven't seen anyone yet who is pulling that information in. But if you are in a lab and you have several people who are there with you during this webinar, if you would be so kind as to list your name and the other people who are with you listening to this webinar, that way we can have an accurate count of everybody who's present. So that would be greatly appreciated, because we do have a limitation on the numbers of people who can get in, but I know many of you are seeing so many more than just have, you know, maybe 5 or 6 people with you. So if you could do that for us, we'd greatly appreciate it. One last kind of technical item, because I can see as the screen is changing, we have just a little bit of delay, and I'll take the blame for that because I'm up here in the mountains of North Carolina, and so that may be what's going on with it. But we do have a little bit of a delay in between the slides changing. So, so bear with us as we go through and we work through that process.
Okay, thank you, Susan. And you know, you are so correct about GED Ready. The stats are showing about, depending upon the subtest, 95 to 98% accuracy, that if they're ready to go, that green area on GED Ready, which is a 158 or above, chances of them passing the operational version, 95 to 98%. Not too bad of odds. Okay, what is the big picture? Most of you with us today have been with us before, and some of this may be a review, but just a couple quick overview slides. We need to remember on the 2014 GED test that, quite honestly, it's still a very heavily weighted multiple choice test question. In fact, 80% of the questions are and continue to be multiple choice. Yes, there are different technology enhanced items such as the drag drop and the drop down and the hot spots, but 80% does continue to be multiple choice. And the test, as we look at what it looks like, there again, we're looking at a fairly lengthy testing time for reasoning through language arts. But again, there is a break for our students. Math, again, went from a 90-minute test last year to 115 minutes a number of months ago because students needed more time. And then science and social studies. So as you look at that more later, but again, you'll notice that we have extended responses, the ERs, and we have short answers. And we'll talk about what problems those may or may not be causing us as we go forward. As we look at how important the writing samples are, the integrated reading and writing, just be aware that the one extended response, which is a 45-minute test question, is equated to about 20% of reasoning through language arts. So that's fairly hefty. Social studies the same way. That one extended response is about 20% of the test, and then the two short answers in science are worth about 15%. And although students do not need to answer them in order to pass, the chances of them passing without at least attempting and getting some skills in that are not good. We know now that performance level 1, 2, and 3 indicate the type of standards or assessment targets that students need to master in order to get these scores. Performance level 1 are those students who did not pass the test because their score was 100 to 149. We're seeing quite a few students in that 140 plus range. Performance level 2, those are the skills that are required for a student to pass the test, that 150 to 169. And then if students get a 170 or above on any of the different tests, they will get on their samples a GED score with honors. And we are seeing a number of our students who have gotten above that 170, which is really exciting. Last year, you heard Susan and me talk a lot about PLDs. Those are your performance level descriptors, and as far as we're concerned, it's the best thing you can download so that you can determine not only what type of curriculum you want to develop, but also what kinds of materials. So, quick overview. But why you're here today is to find out what in the world are the challenges in this new test. So GED Testing Service nationwide has now administered enough of these tests. They have been able to analyze the data and come up with the areas that are causing our students the most difficulty. So Susan, let's take a look at this.
Okay, and I do apologize. Every now and then you were getting some problems off of my screen, and I'm not really sure what's happening, but we'll keep plowing on through, and if we need to, we'll move over to have Bonnie as the presenter. But let's talk about mathematical reasonings. Now, if you were to ask students, they would say that math just makes things more complicated, but it doesn't. It really is about it makes complicated things simple. If we have that foundation, we have those basic skills that we can use and play on to answer problems in the real world. So let's start with mathematical reasoning and the most missed items. Sitting at the top of the heap is something that, I'll be honest with you, Bonnie and I were shocked when we saw this, because it's about computing area and circumference of circles, which is really a very ABE skill. And our students, as long as they have that formula sitting out there, which granted they have changed the formula page and it's on there, they should be able to do this. But what it does is it's not asking them necessarily, and the problem is not always how to get the circumference, but more of, I have the answer, I know what the circumference is, now can I figure out the radius or the diameter? So we have to make sure that students are comfortable across the board with this, that they understand circumference is what. Now, if I know the circumference, how am I going to get the diameter? And then if I can find the diameter, then how do I determine what the radius is? Those are the kinds of things that students need. So that's at the very beginning of this. And again, let me see if I can't get this out. Bonnie, I may have to change you over as the presenter
No
since I
problem.
have something that's coming on. We'll see if this will work now at this point. Okay, let's look at the next one. Quantitative reasoning. See, we're still in that very basic area there. Compute perimeter or area of polygons. Find the side length when given the perimeter or area. These are things our students need not just for a test, but what person sitting here around this webinar today doesn't need something when it comes to having worked with rectangles and figuring out the area that they're going to have to cover with tile or hardwood floors. These are some of the very basics. But what we have to do is get students in and help them with these different formulas, make them real. Put them not into a work page, but really into how it works in real life so that whatever it asks them to do, they can manipulate that formula and use it. Now, as I said earlier, they have made changes on the formula page so that some of those basic formulas are back on there again. And if you haven't downloaded that from the GED testing service, you're going to want to do so.
Susan, you know,
And
when
then
I
there's
looked at that, it really
Mhm.
reminded me when I looked back at books that I used to have, how many times those books would have people go ahead and use the formula to find, quote, the answer. What it looks like students are having problems with here is finding the pieces or parts of the whole.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. You know, and think of it this way, that, you know, life doesn't always present us with this, ta-da, nice little answer that we're coming up with. We have to discover the different pieces and parts and work from different angles. And, you know, one of those problem-solving strategies we always talk about is that working backward. So sometimes we have to find a part as opposed to finding the whole or what our students would expect to see as an answer. And then there's another thing, and we actually had, this was one of those problem children on the 2002 test. They're calling it, instead of irregular shapes, they're calling them composite shapes. But it's when you combine two different shapes together, and now you have to find the perimeter or the area of that. And just like you can see here, the little house consists of all these different pieces, and now I have to put them together. So we need to make sure that our students are taking those formulas, recognizing what parts of them they have to use if they're faced with a composite shape itself. Again, these are some basics. So we really need to be handling this in our ABE programs and just making sure that we have reinforced that when we get them into GED. Now, the next part in dealing with quantitative reasoning is just looking at scale. How does it affect the length of a side when I change the overall size of an object? These, again, this is some of the same things that we had in the 2002 test. So this is not like we're testing and assessing something that's at a different skill level. So again, think back to where we were at that point. Now the other one, and how much more real life can you get, comes down to, can I, as a student, solve a two-step real-world problem that involves percent? And our students should be comfortable with working with percents, whether it's interest or taxes or markups, tips. All of these things are everyday skills for our students. And so we can certainly work with these. And if we do, as Bonnie often says, we need to teach these in context, so that students can see how they work in real life and then own that information itself. Now, the next part. Okay, this is probably where we begin to get a little bit more of a concern, because quite honestly, we haven't done an awful lot of algebra within our programs. We focus more on the basics, but look at the first two. Locating points in a coordinate plane. Students had to do that. when they were working through, excuse me, in the 2002 test. In fact, that was the innovation where they had to bubble in. Or determining the slope of a line. Again, a skill that is something that is at the basic level, not a more complicated one. Now, getting into graphing two variable linear equations, that's new, because for us, you know, many of our students just didn't stay around as long as we would like them to, so we didn't have a chance to get up into those higher levels and work with multiple variables and that type of thing. But if you look at this for a minute, you'll see it comes back to, could that student do slope, which is a big deal for our students, and making sure they can understand that. And then there's some others that, quite honestly, the first two here are pretty basic, but because we've got those letters in there, students may get a little bit concerned about them. Can I solve a one variable linear equation or formulas with multiple variables? And we've just given you examples because for me personally, I have to see, okay, what is that telling me? What does that look like? So I can show you here. Can I deal with inequalities? Inequality is something that our students should be starting with in the ABE level. Is it less than, greater than, less than and equal to? But again, we can start these things much earlier than what we have always expected. And then finally, can I deal with those one variable quadratic equations? Those are the areas that we have to look at. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. When Bonnie was talking a little while ago about the fact that sometimes you're not trying to find the answer, you're having to find a part or a piece of it, the same thing holds true in algebraic reasoning, where students are going to be asked on this test to create the linear expression. So they're going to have to read a word problem, translate it over into the symbols. So here's an example. On an algebra test, the highest grade was 42 points higher than the lowest grade. The sum of the two grades was 138. Now what the student has to do is find the lowest grade. So they're going to have to create that linear expression in order to make a determination on that lowest grade. Now they might be asked on a test to actually show the expression itself rather than going all the way and actually finding, quote unquote, what that variable equals. So keep in mind what we're going to be asking students to do. Sometimes it's not about solving the problem, it's about how we set up the problem itself. And then one more. Can I create one or two variable linear equations that represent situations that are given? Again, our students have to be able to do that translation piece. And I believe, Bonnie, if I remember correctly, when we did the math training, which would have been year before last?
Yes.
Okay, we had the translation guide was one of those things that was included. So you may want to look back in some of the work that you had, because that was something that shows students, if I have these words, I should be looking to see this operation or this type of expression. But our students have to learn how to translate in their head and then on their notepad what that means in algebraic terms. So in this case, we have the cost of admission to a popular music concert was $162 for 12 children and 3 adults. The admission was $122 for 8 children and 3 adults in another music concert. Well, how much was the admission for each child and each adult? Again, what do I have to do? I have to work with two different variables, and then I have to solve from there. And I can solve for X, substitute 10 in for that, and I'm able to find out what the cost for an adult would be. these are things that we need to, and I think Bonnie probably says it best, we have to model this process for students. How do I think through and understand what the problem is asking me to do? How do I translate it? And then finally, how do I come in and solve it? So this is at those levels, that upper level that they're having difficulty with, that we need to see if we can't put a little bit more emphasis. One thing to keep in mind, though, with this is that we really do need to make them real world problems to the greatest extent possible so that they can relate this to something with which they're familiar. So,
you know, Susan, the other thing I'll add to making them real-world problems is realizing that teaching a test question isn't going to help our students at all. What they need to be able to do is look at the assessment target or the standard and determine what kinds of questions would meet that criteria. So there again, if they're talking about one or two variable linear equations, what does that mean in the world? What kinds of problems would they be facing that have that kind of skill? That will help transference.
absolutely. So real world, hit those basics, but make sure that students are seeing not just that, oh, I've got this formula and I plug things in, but that they really understand what that formula consists of and that they can work with it in a number of different angles. And that we're not always on this test, and especially in real life, looking for, quote, an answer. Sometimes we're looking for the process. So those are important issues for us to keep in mind. Now we're going to go forward and we're going to look a bit through reasoning, through language arts, then social studies and science. And again, after they went through and analyzed all of the different data, this is where they came in and said, these are the greatest challenges. So think in terms of, okay, if this is the problem in my classroom, how am I going to solve that? So Bonnie, I'm going to let you lead
Take
them
a
on
look
in.
at it. Yeah. Today's webinar, again, is just identifying the ideas. Just realize as we go forward, we will work on more strategies. But there are a couple things, again, just like in math, that surprised Susan and me a little bit. And this is one of them. And that is the aspect that questions where students have to understand specific details and main ideas, or oftentimes what we call central ideas in a written source, was difficult for them. Now, a lot of it, we believe, is because it is more complex reading. And oftentimes that main or central idea is not just explicitly stated, but students have to do a close reading and figure it out. The same thing with determining which details support that main or central idea, a real problem child for our students. And these types of assessment targets that they're having problems with could be occurring in the multiple choice or technology enhanced items, but there are also problems if they don't know how to deal with these things when they write an extended response. So there again, we really do need to work with more complex text and make sure that our students really can identify not only the main and central idea, which is right there, but that they have to dig deeper and infer what it is and then know what kind of details support that. The other area of concern is the fact that our students are having difficulty identifying themes or elements that support a theme. And as I think about this, I'm thinking to myself, not only would this be reasoning through language arts, but it really could be an issue in science or social studies. Social studies where we have those enduring issues, can they identify that theme or enduring issue, and can they find the elements that support it? Can they determine in a piece of fiction what's the theme, what's the overarching idea of that written sample, and what supports what you think? Again, something that's not new, but again continues to be a problem for our students. The other thing in reasoning through language arts is being able to analyze relationships within written sources. And as we're looking at what that means. What we're really looking at is, as our students or test takers are reading things, can they examine the form, content, and organization of the written sources and identify relationships? Can they determine an author's purpose and perspective? Can they identify the author's claims and the reason why the author is making such claims? And there again, can they determine if evidence is sufficient and accurate? Not only, again, in the multiple choice and technology-enhanced items, but also in the extended responses. And then there's always that wonderful thing called logical fallacies, errors in reasoning, where again, students are not going from step 1 to step 2 in a logical manner, but they're making inferences that just are not correct. So that whole bit of analyzing relationships in complex text is causing our students difficulty. But as I said, 20% of RLA is determined by the extended response that our students do. And from the field, we keep hearing a lot of you saying, but you know, the score came back and I saw that my students had gotten scoreable zeros. Well, a scoreable zero is very similar to in the past test, that 2, that marginal writing. And as we said this summer in one of the webinars that we did, we do know the process to teach our students how to write an extended response. We know students have to clearly read the passage in question and unpack that prompt. We know that our students have to rewrite that question into a thesis statement and then collect details that support that thesis statement or claim that they've made. Those details need to be in a logical order. They need to draft, and of course we always want them to revise and edit so that they catch those little problem children. We also know that no longer are we working with a 5-paragraph essay structure, but instead we're working with a structure that provides the reader with a beginning, middle, and end. So as our students write, they need to have the beginning or the intro that sets the claim or the evaluative piece. They need to have the middle part, which may be part of a paragraph or multiple paragraphs. And then they need a conclusion which does more than just restate the beginning or the intro. But there is another step to the writing process for a constructed response, and that is the aspect that no longer is this persuasive type of writing per se. It is what we term argumentative writing. For those of us who once upon a time were in debate, a name by the name of Toulmin may sound familiar because he set up a process for argumentative writing or debating. And in a very simple style, it's the fact that when you're writing argumentatively, you have to set a point or a claim. You have to support that claim with evidence, and just as importantly, you need to explain how that evidence supports the claim. If I say one author's claim is stronger and more valid because it has more recent research, I need to explain how a study done in 2004 is more valid than a study done in 1998. And then I need to link it or transition it to the next point, keeping that nice formal style. No longer are we writing I think, I feel, I want, but rather in that formal style of the author. So argumentative writing. And as we said before, we will go into more strategies at our next webinars, but just briefly, whatever strategies that you're teaching in the classroom, realize that just once is not enough. So as you're teaching the writing process, starting with ABE standards, because argumentative writing starts at ABE level 2, make sure students have some background knowledge, that they know what strategy that they're going to use. And as Susan said earlier, that you model it. And so once you're done modeling and they've worked with you, that they've got it. And as they're implementing it, you take them step by step, supporting them each step of the way. The other thing is making sure that we do dedicate time to writing and writing instruction across the curriculum. Remember, our students have to write more than just an RLA. They have to write in social studies, they have to write in science, and of course, they have to write in their daily life. So the strategies that we're teaching in RLA should cross all content areas, because effective reading and effective writing don't change just because I change from a social studies nonfiction to a science nonfiction. And again, as much as we can using complex text and nonfiction. So those are a few things on RLA that we're finding that we have a difficult time with. So let's move on to social studies and science.
Okay, so we have a couple of areas here when we get into social studies and science, but I think what you'll see is there's a connection back to what you saw with RLA. Because here we are in social studies, and the top of the list is to be able to determine clearly stated details. I think we had to do that, if I'm correct, back in RLA. Only this time we're looking at it from primary and secondary sources. And we're going to have to use those details to make logical inferences or claims. Next, we've got to be able to describe what's going on, the people, the places, the environments, the processes. But even more importantly, how do they connect? What's the connection between and among those things? And last but not least, and this has been a problem in our adult education population for quite a while, is about cause and effect. And how do our students really get to that and understand it? So let's take a quick look at just a couple of things here. We know a primary source is the original. It's the first. But you know, we think of primary sources and the first thing we think of is, oh, Declaration of Independence. But there are also primary sources in science, and that might be the results of a clinical trial that it's reported, or a report of some scientific discovery. Lots of those types of things. If it's secondary, it's really an analysis. So we might see something in the paper that talks about this new breakthrough in curing some type of cancer, but they're giving an analysis, not the report itself. We'd have to look at that actual study and the results of that study to have a primary source. But our students need to be able to read from both. And we understand there's some unique challenges because a primary source that we often find in social studies, first of all, it was written at a different time. The structure of the language is different. The vocabulary is different. That can be a challenge for students. When it comes to the sciences, it can be a challenge because it's more technically oriented. It has different vocabulary and maybe some really unknown vocabulary for students that can be challenging. But again, the basic reading skill they need is to be able to pull those details out. So whatever we do in working with those basic comprehension is going to help us within these two areas as well. Now the next thing is really cause and effect. And our students just seem to struggle with that, and compare and contrast is another area that we've often seen as a problem. But students have to remember cause is the reason, effect is the result. But for many of our students, the problem occurs when they don't recognize those clue words. And so I know that many of you have done a lot of work on clue words and transition words when you're doing writing, but our students still need to be able to see if it says this, if, then, cause, effect. Those are the types of things that our students are going to have to work with. Now, when we come over into science, we're talking about some of the same pieces here, where we've got, can I pull evidence from a written source to support a finding or conclusion? Evidence, that's usually coming back to details. Can I identify those pieces of information that are going to support something else? Then can I express that information in words? Because as Bonnie said, we've got two short answers sitting over there in science, one of which is going to ask the students to take a hypothesis and tell how they would collect the data and get the results and all those things. And can I really understand and apply scientific models, theories, and processes? So how about evidence? Well, we could start with something as simple as, on page so-and-so it said. In paragraph 3 it said. The author wrote. We can give those sentence starters to our students to get them into this process. And as Bonnie said a few minutes ago, all of this begins at an early point. We're not waiting till the GED level. We can actually start all of this as we're working back into ABE, that level 2. As you're looking at college and career readiness standards for adult education, all of this is a continuum and something that we can focus on from there. Expressing scientific information or findings in words, this comes straight from the free practice test, and looking at what is it asking my student to do. Look at that prompt. Cite multiple pieces of data from the table that support why wind energy would be a preferred energy source over coal. Multiple pieces of data from a certain place. That's what our students have to be able to do. And finally, they have to understand and apply scientific models. Here's my theory. Let me take that theory and use it to make a prediction. So then I have to design an experiment to test that prediction. I got to try it out. And then I've got to see what happened, and then maybe I need to modify my theory a little bit. You know, this is like working in math and problem solving, where I have to understand that problem, and I've got to create that plan and try it out, and if it doesn't work, I have to change and do something else. The same thing holds true when we're talking about science itself. So what are we going to do in these areas? Model, 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 model. We have to model, we have to explain, we have to guide students through things. This is not something they're going to pick up just by reading something in a workbook. They need to talk through this. But we also have to make sure that we keep these things real. We don't want students saying, why do I have to know this? Up front, we should be saying, we're going to learn this because.
So as we go through saying, we do need to learn this because not only is it something we need to have for the test, but more importantly, it's something that we need for post-secondary education in the workplace. We need these skills for life. And as Susan said, it's not just about keeping it real individually, but as much as we can, whole class and small group instruction so our students have the chance to not only work through the skills, but see how they can apply them in different scenarios, making sure that we do set high expectations for all of our students. As Susan and I look through these areas of most need, it just seems to us that a lot of it has to do with strong reading skills that deal with rigorous text where they can find the central idea and the evidence to support it. Strong writing skills in different areas, not just about an emotional base, but rather text base. And then strong problem solving and critical thinking skills, those higher order reasoning skills. As we go forward, we are going to try to assist as we go forward in getting more resources so that all of us can put those to work in our program. But just a couple things for you to know before we take some questions. First of all, if you're not staying tuned to Florida IP Day, please do so, because right now on Florida IP Day, our state's website for professional development, we do have beginning lesson plans for GED, a GED prep handbook, and grab and goes, videos from the field for the field. Stay tuned, because this year we'll have more videos, we will have more lesson plans written by fellow teachers. But if you're like me, as I looked through the math One of the comments I thought was, wow, it looks like a lot of algebraic reasoning skills there. Right now on the Florida IPDAY website, there is an IPDAY Math MOOC. And that's what you see here, which is available to any of us for free, written by math instructors. And as I was looking through those different sections, I thought, aha, my goodness, this looks like some of the areas of need that our students have. And maybe I'm not the math guru or math expert. So this may not only be good for my students, but good for me as I go through and say, I forgot how to simplify radicals, or gee, I really need some more information on how to graph linear equations. Again, if you've not been out to this MOOC, take a look at it. See what kinds of things will work well for your classroom, because I guarantee they really do align well with many of the skills that our students are having difficulty with, and definitely our new GED assessment targets. But besides that, there will be lots more later as we head through. So hopefully that gives all of us a little bit of an idea. You also have, as a download, a 2-page document from GED Testing Service that lists the different areas of concern. And that's a nice document for you to be able to at least print, and as you're looking through your lessons, supporting those kinds of skills, making sure that you do have lessons for it. So before we go to that last document, Susan, let's open it up to some questions.
Okay, and we do have one question that was put in by Irene. What was the passing percentage rate on the 2002 test? And Bonnie, if I remember correctly, we were at the 72% mark, I think, at the end of the test itself. So 72.4%,
we'll
something
have
along
Susan
those
back
lines.
with us in a moment.
Are you not picking up now, Bonnie?
You can be heard.
Okay.
If you have questions, if you will, please put them either in the chat box or the question and answer box, and we'll make sure that we can answer them. Susan will have access to looking at the question and answer box and or the chat box.
Bonnie, can you hear me now?
Susan, you can be heard. You can go ahead to the next question.
Okay, because Bonnie's not responding. It says, am I correct that the scoring for the ERs is different with the social studies only? Have 0 to 1 points available for traits 2 and 3. That's from Lindsay, and Lindsay, the answer to that is yes, the scoring for the ERs is different with social studies. On trait 1, they can get a maximum of 2 points. On trait 2 and 3, it's 1. So for they can get a maximum of 8 points total for social studies extended response. And let's see if we have any questions in the chat. And I don't see any other questions out there. Do we? Oh, let's see. Where do I get the PowerPoint? That question just came in. The PowerPoint was actually sent to you as one of the documents for you to open. You have it in a PDF form, 3 slides, and so if you will also have those materials will be out on the IPDAY website, so you may want to make sure. The next thing is, how much are the questions worth? The questions themselves, there are a certain number of raw points that you can earn for across the board, and so you can't really say that, oh, each question is worth 1 point. But in social studies, a student can earn up to 44 raw points. And that would be 8 of those points would be for the extended response itself. And that in science they can earn 40 raw score points. Again, 6 of those would be points that they would get for the writing itself. And as far as I will have to turn that question over as one that I would ask of Joseph, is I can't see any questions in the chat. Why? And I believe all of the questions are actually going into a Q&A section rather than into the chat itself.
Correct. Attendees cannot see the questions. You can ask a question and we can see it on this side.
Okay. Any other questions that you have out there, please feel free to ask. And we'll be more than happy to answer any of them that you have. Now, one other thing I will do at this point is there's one other document that you received, and I'm going to pull that up very quickly for you. And this is the document that was sent to you along with the PowerPoint. This is from the GED testing service, and this particular document lists each of those indicators where students were having difficulty. This is how we built the PowerPoint for you today, was based on this information. And so this is a handy one. It's just 2 pages that you can go back through and review whenever you like. So you can have this one and maybe check off and say, oh, I need to make sure that I'm covering each of these different items as I'm working with my curriculum itself. So you receive 2 items, that one, then the PowerPoint itself. And I'll go back over to the PowerPoint now and check to see if we have any more questions. Oh, Rebecca wanted to know math raw points. The raw points in math, there are 49 that they can receive. Now remember, some questions have some stimulus material, has multiple questions that go with that. And in reasoning through language arts, there's 65 raw score points. And that's included on your chart, and it would have been on your PowerPoint itself. But of the 65 points for reasoning through language arts, 12 of those can be pulled from the reasoning from the extended response. The few students that I had observed with our group have questions probably we must address most. What type of cause and effect question is asked, and can you give another example? What I would do, what I would recommend to you, Linda, is that you take a look in the free practice test, and they have some examples of different types of things that may be there. But for example, if I were thinking in terms of a cause and effect for something in social studies, I may be reading a document about things that were leading up to the Civil War, and then what were the effects that happened after that. Or I might be looking at something like the letter from the Birmingham jail from Dr. Martin Luther King, and his letter was actually the result of a letter that had been done before that. How did it lead up? So I think you can take students into a number of different things, but they need to understand not just a question that you would see on the test, but more, what are some cause and effect things that happen in life? And if I exceed the speed limit, what might be my effects of that? Well, I might end up with a very hefty speeding ticket. I think what we have to do with students in many cases like this, especially in some of that analysis area, is bring that back to real life and how it's going to impact there. If a problem in any subject has multiple answers, does each segment receive a point? That's kind of a two different things going on here. if, for example, they were asked to read a passage and put a list of events in order, and there were 4 or 5 events, they would have to get all of them correct in order to get the point for the question. But if you have a stimulus material, say you have a chart or a graph, and it asks 3 distinct questions, then you could pick up points for each of the questions. So there are 2 ways you have to look at that. Karen, I am not real sure about the extended response. Oh, the fill-in-the-blank type of guide. If you're talking about the resource guide that the GED Testing Service just put out, they gave some examples of how to write thesis statements, and they also included some thesis frames. Those of you who were with us when we were doing the extended response and working with English language arts and doing the training, that's one of the things that we had used at that point. Understand that they're not going to use that in having students do an extended response. They're not going to give them a fill-in-the-blank. That was more used as a teaching tool. Now, in Reasoning Through Language Arts, there are documents that they have to, and I'll call it edit, and use different grammar rules, and those have your drop-down menus where they're having to fill in different things. But the extended response is straight across the board, extended response. Will all of this information apply to the GED in Spanish? Todd, we'll have to ask that question specifically of the GED Testing Service. They have to have a certain number of students who have taken the test in order to ensure that the information is valid. So this, I know, is based on the English results. The summary put out by the GED Testing Service, if you're talking about the one that I just showed you that gives those answers, it is listed on the GED Testing Service website. Go under Educators and look for it from there. Any word on the use of a physical calculator for math? Yes, they are in the process of looking at that. No, the decision has not been reached at this point. There are a number of different processes that they have to go through in order to do that, but that is under consideration at this point. And let's see, did I miss anybody? I think I got them all. Where can I find more information for the Spanish test? Your best source always is the GED Testing Service website. If you go under For the Educator, you will find any document that is in English will also be provided in Spanish. How complex is the report for GED Ready test? I won't say that it's complex. What I will say is that it is a comprehensive report, meaning that it does break down into the different areas where students are having difficulty. So what I would recommend to you is when you have a student who takes GED Ready, have them print off the report, give it to you so that you can take a really good look at it. Bonnie and I should be having access to some sample reports before too long, and maybe we can include that in one of the webinars at some point further on. Other questions? Okay, I hear Bonnie's voice in the background, so.
It told me I needed new software. It's the joy of technology.
Bonnie, you want to wrap it up for us, please?
Sure will. We like this quote from Edutopia that says, the best professional development is ongoing, experiential, collaborative, and connected to and derived from working with students. I think it says it all for both Susan and me, and hopefully for you as well. Please stay connected as we move forward. As we look at new webinars for our Webinar Wednesday, as we look at new materials, and please, please, the best information always comes from our fellow instructors. So as you're moving forward, as you have those innovative ideas, please share, because the wisdom of the crowd is always absolutely wonderful. So on behalf of Susan and me, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. Joseph, thank you very much for setting this up. And thank you to each and every one of you for having spent your afternoon with us.